Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Last Week in BookTube. This is a feature that I've done on my channel on and off many times, in which I sort of look back at the last week in BookTube and book news and all sorts of other stuff, just sort of a moment to gather stock of what's been happening, stuff that I have seen, the stuff that I have watched. Not meant to be comprehensive in any way, not meant to be a total list. I do a lot of YouTube watching, but highlights and maybe some lowlights, just things to bring to your attention. I have done this series on and off over the years that I've had this channel. It at one point got me into a lot of trouble, but also brought a lot of people into my acquaintance, which was great. And I've done it on and off since then throughout the years, and every time I do it, people say the same thing about it. People comment that they like how it introduces them to all sorts of new things, new channels that they wouldn't maybe not have seen otherwise. And I always find it very interesting, very entertaining to do, to look back and do this sort of thing. I'm an inveterate journal keeper, so it's a natural instinct anyway. So I want to try it again and see if I can stick with it this time. So we're going to do Last Week in BookTube, and it's not going to be a discrete week. There's going to be a little bit of telescoping, probably towards the more recent stuff, and maybe telescoping a little bit towards the more distant stuff, because I haven't done this in a long time. So we're going to do a sort of a slightly more amorphous version now, and then hopefully, with any luck, next week, Last Week in BookTube will just be Last Week in BookTube. It's not just BookTube, because we're going to start out with the world. A couple of things just that happened in the world. Then we're going to go to the book world. A couple of things that happened in the book world, but not necessarily on BookTube. Maybe things that were reflected on BookTube, but that happened in the larger book world. And then we'll go to BookTube. So we'll start with the world. And the two big things that I jotted down here for the world, one involves America, of course, and that is that the Biden administration bombed Syria. According to military proponents, military spokespeople, it did so as a kind of military analysts say that it did so at a kind of warning to Iran, that extraterritorial problems, aggressions on Iran's part will not be tolerated, will be met with counter-aggression. Only this didn't happen on Iranian soil. This happened to Syria, and it's a little bit depressing. The takeaway of this particular thing is a little bit depressing, which is that we can expect this kind of crap to go on even under the Joe Biden administration, which pitched itself, the American people, as a kind of sane, morally balanced breath of fresh air. And yet, although the military is being inexcusably cagey about what actually happened, I want to ask these military spokespeople and the generals that they represent, I want to ask them who they think they work for. Whose name are they acting in? Whose taxes paid for the weapons of death and destruction that they're using, that they think they can then turn around and say, I'm not going to tell you what I did? It's just to somebody whose politics were forged when mine were, it's infuriating. It is easy to read between the lines of the Pentagon statements on this bombing in Syria and know beyond a shadow of a doubt that what was bombed was an apartment building full of people who don't have any idea about the latest international intrigues between America and Iran, and don't have any dog in the fight either way. They're just going on about their business. You can be sure that in 10, 15, 20 years, when the details of this thing come to light, that's what it will be, and it will be totally forgotten. Except for the tragedies, the lives that were ruined in the process. Just the takeaway from me is a little bit depressing, because it signals to me business as usual on the Biden administration. That sure, we might get hung up with a trans person in a lead health organization position, or a female vice president, or voting rights executive decisions that can be overturned by the next racist that comes into the Oval Office. We can be distracted by a lot of that, when really a $2 trillion Pentagon budget and bombs flying wherever we feel like making a point. Only it's not we at all. It's the Pentagon running the show. And that's a little depressing. Again, from where my politics originated, that's a little depressing. And that's world item number one. World item number two is, I felt I owed it to you, a little more on the optimistic side, which is that former French President Nicolas Sarkozy has been sentenced to jail for corruption. He got a 3-year jail sentence, 2 of which will not be served in a prison, but 1 of which will be. This is a former president of France who's corrupt up to his eyeballs, but nevertheless, what do we expect in a circumstance like that, where a figure is just known to be corrupt up to their eyeballs? What do we expect? You can say it with me. We expect them to get away with it. Now, an ordinary individual in France who did anything like the kind of corruption that Sarkozy has been convicted of would spend a lot more than 1 year in jail, but nevertheless, I can't help but view it as optimistic that at least somewhere the old shibboleth of no one is above the law is actually being acted on. That it made me interested in a slightly optimistic way that happened. So then we'll move on to book world news. And the book world news in relatively the last week or so, there have been 2 big stories. And you may have seen one of them reflected. Actually, both of them. You may have seen both of them reflected at one point or another in various BookTube videos. The first that we'll deal with is the Dr. Seuss literary estate that decided to pull from publication a handful of Dr. Seuss books that traffic in racist stereotypes, racist visual iconography, racist paradigms that were common when the books came out, but that we look at now and say, oh, no, no, no. And that is a cause for optimism. That progress, and that's what it is, that progress is not illusionary. Our consciousness has been raised in a genuine way. And that's important and also very good. That is very optimistic. And it caused a firestorm. That decision on the part of the Seuss estate caused a firestorm, not least in the ongoing clown car circus that is the United States Congress, where senators who don't care at all got up to defend Green Eggs and Ham, which is not one of the books that's being pulled, explicitly for culture war reasons and to distract the American people from all the stuff that they're not doing. It's exclusively Republican senators that got up to criticize this decision, and they did it exclusively. They were Republican senators who voted against a COVID relief package that had to be passed over the objections of a gigantic Nazi Party bloc in the United States Congress to get relief out to American citizens in the middle of a pandemic. Those politicians want to shift the focus elsewhere. They want you to look at something else. And the culture war is the way they do that. That is, the Nazi Party branch of what used to be the Republican Party in the United States likes nothing more than the phrase cancel culture. They like nothing more than to bring that out. It's perfect. It's perfect. As a weapon to distract and to club imaginary enemies, they like nothing better than to do that. If they were in power, they would be very much in favor of their own version of cancel culture, but that's the way the culture war works. And the discussions that you may have seen on BookTube were fascinating. And in our little corner of BookTube were a perfect illustration of why this little neighborhood we've carved out for each other is so great. Because first, Brian at Bookish brought up this whole controversy on one of his Hodge-Podge videos, which we're going to be getting to, and irately described how no one is canceling Dr. Seuss. It's the Dr. Seuss literary estate itself, with no pressure brought on it, that looked at these books and thought, we don't want to be disseminating these things to children. We don't want to be putting these things out into the world. There are plenty of copies out there already, and it's just not healthy. What is the upside, said the Dr. Seuss literary estate, in pushing these, in reproducing these things if we have the control not to? And so they decided not to and put out a statement to that effect. And Brian was, in his video, said, along the same lines of what I'm saying here, said this is, when you see senators in the United States Congress being irate about this, they are trying to distract you. They are, in other words, lying to you. They don't care about what they're fulminating about. They care about what they're doing, that they don't want you to be concentrating on. And that it's not cancel culture because no one's canceling these things. The people who are in charge of producing them are just deciding not to produce them anymore. And we also got a response video from Jason at Old Blues Chapter and Verse, when he went out of his way to make a special video giving another viewpoint, an opposing viewpoint, in his point, saying, Better to have these things out in the world and use them as teaching opportunities. Better to treat everyone involved, even the children, so to speak, as adults who can handle this stuff and contextualize it and talk about it. He mentions in his video, I'll leave a link to everything down below. He mentions in his video that removing these things, even if the Seuss literary estate didn't have a gun to their head, is the start of a slippery slope. Because look around at all the other things, not just, I mean, you could start with the Dr. Seuss back catalog, but look everywhere else at the things that may be removed. Because, let's say, a publishing house decides this isn't appropriate anymore. When instead, Jason's point is, those things should still be out there in the world, still be produced, and we should just talk about them. That we won't learn from them if we don't even see them. And the reason I say this is an example of why this little corner of BookTube is so wonderful is because Jason and Brian could talk about this over beers without any trouble at all and without any fist flying. A disagreement that is just had in the open between adults in a normal way, in a way that doesn't endanger friendship, but is just vigorously disagreeing. Now, in terms of Jason's video where he talks about the slippery slope, I might point out, when I was watching his video, I thought, well, this is great. I agree completely. But compelling a literary estate to keep producing books they don't want to produce is also a foot put on a slippery slope of a different kind. And I don't know that I agree with that. Jason makes a couple of allusions to the fact that those canceled Dr. Seuss books are now collectible items. They instantly became collectible items. That won't always stay true. No one's going to remember this little flap in 20 years. So I don't know that the books won't still be out there. And I'm not 100% sure that a better teaching opportunity wouldn't be to intentionally bring up these things to children as racial stereotypes in that context, rather than, let's say, have a classroom just stumble across them. One way or another, I thought the interplay was fantastic. Less discussed on BookTube, mentioned as far as I know in only one place that I've seen, and that is Barb and Isabella at the Font, is the other book world piece of news, which involves the poet Amanda Gorman, who a lot of you will know because she gave a rather good, rather affecting poetry recital at Joe Biden's inauguration. It managed to raise the level of poetry appreciation in the Joe Biden administration even higher than the level of poetry appreciation had been in the Trump administration. Anywho, as is usually the case in non-Nazi administrations, the person who gives a poetry recital at the inauguration suddenly becomes a cause celeb in the publishing world, and they get a publishing deal. There is suddenly a hunger for poetry places where it usually doesn't lurk, and the same thing is true with Amanda Gorman. Other publishing houses in other countries wanted the right to publish her forthcoming book, which includes the inauguration poem and a bunch of other stuff. And a Dutch publishing house hired a translator, a much lauded young figure in the poetry, in the Dutch poetry world, and a figure who was Amanda Gorman's own first choice. And then the fake outrage mob got hold of the fact that the translator is white and Amanda Gorman is black, and this culminated in a Dutch figure named Janice Duell, who's hilariously referred to as an activist/journalist, when in fact, I want to point out, just for clarity's sake, journalism means the objective assessment of facts, and activism means adherence to a cause greater than yourself. And these two things do not in any way apply to the person being described there. So, but one way or another, Janice Duell said, complained, objected, I would say threatened, that the translator of Amanda Gorman's poetry should be black. And the Dutch publishing house, instead of saying, that's openly racist and explicitly segregationalist, and you should seek psychiatric help or get yourself into one of your oh-so-popular re-education camps, but don't expect us to do something as horrible as that. Instead of doing that, the Dutch publishing house immediately capitulated and have announced that that translator, that white translator, is fired, and they are going to assemble a team of new translators, all of whom will know why they are hired. In the broader sense, they will know they are being hired for racist reasons. They are being hired for a translation job based on their skin color. And on the more specific level, they'll know that they're being hired because Janice Duell agrees with them having the job. I don't think there's any chance at all that Dutch publishing house won't consult her before they announce their next translator. Why would they? And run the risk of her doing this all over again, threatening to tar a publishing house with a label of racist all over again? No, they'll consult her first. And if they consult her first on who the translator of Amanda Gorman's poetry should be, when they're taking her position over that of the poet herself, well, then what's to stop them from consulting her the next time they have a translation job on their hands where maybe the poet isn't white? I doubt very much that Janice Duell will care in the other direction. But if if that Dutch publishing house wants to translate the works of another black poet, do you see any reason why they wouldn't consult with her first? Why? Of course they will. Rather than go through the whole kabuki routine of, gee, this is a nice publishing house you got here. It'd be a shame if something were to happen to it. You wouldn't want that mob I've got assembled behind me to start boycotting you as a racist company, now would you? And Barb and Isabella, they did a great video on being offensive on BookTube, and Barb brought this whole subject up, and mentioned some of the exaggerated language that accompanied it. I think as Barb's way of alluding to the fact that this is in fact fake offense, not real offense. Janice Duell does not care who translates Amanda Gorman's poetry. Janice Duell will not read Amanda Gorman in Dutch or English or any other language. Janice Duell and the other people, tiny handful of people, you could fit them in an elevator, who raised this outcry, only care about power. That's all they care about. And you tell me, when Janice Duell laid her head on her pillow the night that a Dutch publishing company knuckled under to her desire to change the race of a translator, do you think she felt more or less powerful when she laid her head on her pillow at night? Do you think she felt more or less powerful? And I have another question, and while I'm asking you questions, I also want to ask, do you want to live in that world? Do you want to live in the world in which what you can and cannot read is dictated by Janice Duell? Do you have to go to her? And publishing houses have to go to her, look, we don't want any trouble, so how's this for a choice? No, I don't like it. No, I don't like it. The translator that the Dutch publishing house picked is an innovative wordsmith. I might not like any of the work involved, but nevertheless, I recognize innovation when I see it. We will never see that translation because of one person. And I don't want to live in that world. But anyway, that is the bookish world is Dr. Seuss and Amanda Gorman. Not probably the only time those two things will be paired. And then we'll move on to BookTube, where things will be a lot nicer. The world news and the book news isn't always nice, but BookTube always is. And the first batch of recommendations that I want to make to you are portmanteau videos. This little thing that has started to happen where people will just sort of get to the end of a week and just make a sort of all things pushed together type of video. And they are so much fun to watch. So much fun for me. And I can't help but think, since they're getting more and more prevalent, that they're a lot of fun for a lot of people to watch. And I have a bunch of them I want to list here. A Cruel Reader's Thesis, for instance, does a collection of videos that he calls his Sunday Miscellany. And it's always worthwhile, where he just rambles along a series of headings of the things that he has seen, watched, listened to. Wonderful stuff. Fresh Kill Reads is the ongoing thing from Revenant Reads. Great channel. Fantastic channel where he does a portmanteau video of a similar kind. I also have my Bookish Week from Middle of the Book March. One of these every week. Just sort of rambling about books, but the thing about these portmanteau videos that's so nice is that a lot of other stuff can come into them. And that's the reason that I like them very much so. Also, the aforementioned Jason, Old Blues Chapter and Verse, did a Ramble with the Yarn. That is his version of this sort of thing. Always fun. You really do feel like you're just sitting there in the room while he goes over some recent things that he's been thinking. That's the joy of these things. And also the aforementioned Brian at Bookish, his Saturday Hodge-Podge videos. I have to believe incredibly popular on his channel. They're, again, the same thing, where he sits in front of a camera and looks back on his current week and talks about things he's been reading, the things he's been thinking about, the things that have been in the news. At least he talks about those as much as he can in between snatches of being absolutely outraged that his dogs are barking. He has 2 dogs that bark at the slightest. If a dry leaf brushes against the outside of the house, then they are launched off. And it's kind. I'm sure I'm not the only one who finds it kind of funny to watch all the animation drain out of Brian's face when they start. We'll go, and then there's usually a cut, so he can get up and tell them, "Will you quiet down?" And then the last of these portmanteau videos that I want to mention isn't technically by name such a thing. Technically, it is Friday Reads. It's Greg at Supposedly Fun who does a Friday Reads video that he uploads on Saturdays. But I've noticed that there's very much a feel of catching up with his whole week, and it's not just reading, not all the time. And his last one was particularly good, so I'll leave a link to all of these things down below. And then we can do a list of general type stuff, and then we'll wrap this up this last week in BookTube, and then you'll just have to let me know what you think. So what have I got here? I listed a whole bunch of things. Okay, Adrian at Strip Cover Lit subjected the very beginning of the Hunger Games to kind of close reading that I think we can all agree it's not built to withstand. And the result is pretty funny. Britta Bohler has a regular feature on her channel, Tops and Flops. She did hers for February, where she looks back at the highlights and lowlights of her reading in the previous month. Olive at ABookOlive did a tag, the content creator tag. That's all about what it's like to be on BookTube. And I didn't know how badly I was waiting for her specifically to do that tag until I saw it. What a job she does. So good. Tom, LA Books, is, I believe I've mentioned this on this channel before, he is doing an epic read-through of Dante's Divine Comedy. One canto at a time. And it's marvelous. It is a jewel of BookTube. And he's up to Canto 22 of Inferno. And I'll leave a link. You should definitely binge all of them. I don't know if he's made them into a playlist, but what an epic playlist it will be when he's entirely done. Alex at What Page Are You On did a video on reading big books, is the name of it, which he gives some general thoughts about reading really big books. And that is of a special interest now because March is the month of March of the Mammoths, which is designed, March Mystery Madness is also an event going on in March, but March of the Mammoths is designed to celebrate big books, 800 pages or more. And it was interesting to listen to Alex talk about them. Then we have Kieren Westwood, who is, for you authors out there, for you AuthorTube viewers, gives the sanest, most calming advice about writing that anybody gives on YouTube. And he has a recent video called Climb Down Off Your Writing that is well worth watching. If you are a writer, if you write creatively, it's well worth watching and taking to heart because boy, oh boy, is he right. And then, of course, the Poptimist. We can't do a last week in BookTube without mentioning the Poptimist. He introduces the 2021 version of Canada Reads. And he does his usual insightful and hilarious job. I don't think you'll be far into the video before you're wishing that he were a judge for Canada Reads, or maybe the judge. But one way or another, guaranteed, as he puts it in his video, guaranteed that watching not only his Canada Reads 2021 video, but everybody else's, you can find a whole bunch of them online by now, is a fantastic way of learning about new authors and maybe even new kinds of writing. So highly recommended. Then we have Kelly at Books I'm Not Reading did a classic Kelly video. She's been on a string of doing videos that really just speak from her own nature, and it's been nice to see. And she did something called the St. Patrick's Day Shoutout Challenge, where between now and St. Patrick's Day, we all make an effort to shout out smaller or new channels. A great idea, a fantastic idea. I'm contributing a little bit to it in this video, but I have a St. Patrick's Day challenge video of my own that I want to do. But I urge you to watch the video. I urge you also to do it. Do this. If you have more than 1,000 subscribers, there's so much good that you could do for people who don't have more than 200. So if you're watching channels like that, sing their praises. And then the last thing for last week in BookTube that we'll do is from Eric Carl Anderson. We'll finish up with this. He just today, did a video called Being an Introvert Anxious About Lockdown Ending. Because he lives in the UK, and the UK is talking about ending the lockdown. And the elected officials in the UK, naturally, to save their own elected skin, are talking about a permanent. The key to being sure we get this end of lockdown right is that we don't ever have to go into lockdown again. I can't be the only person who's looking at that kind of commentary and thinking, that is such wishful thinking. This could easily happen again. Easily. And since it could so easily happen again, it's really kind of cruel for you to talk about it in the context of getting it right so we don't ever have to do it again. If it's not COVID-19 or any of its variants, I think we can all agree that we are going to see this happen again. And that the tools that we know work for this sort of thing are lockdowns, social distancing, face masks. We're not done with any of these things. But nevertheless, I have watched a whole bunch of YouTube videos on the anxiety of lockdown. Eric's is the first one I've seen on the anxiety of lockdown ending, because he's talking about his fellow introverts, who for a while there, admittedly, to one side, the strain and the stress and the heartbreak of the daily headlines, off to one side of that, one aspect of lockdown has been a little bit of a boon to introverts. Suddenly there's no conceivable pressure to do the kinds of public things that work introverts up. A tiny little silver lining in this whole protracted nightmare and about to come to an end, where suddenly you don't have a built-in excuse anymore not to go to some party, some book launch, some gathering, even some friend's apartment. You have a built-in excuse now, a totally valid excuse now. Everybody does. It's been a little bit trying on those of us who are extroverts. but what is on your mind when you're thinking about that excuse going away? When you're thinking about suddenly it being an extrovert's world again? Eric is entirely right. I think that the world, especially in the 21st century, especially in conjunction with social media, is entirely owned by extroverts. What do introverts think coming to the end of lockdown and looking ahead to that world? Only he could be so eloquent on this subject. So I'll leave a link to his video because it's terrific. And a lot of you, I know, are introverts. So if you're going to, I don't want the chance of you missing his video, because it's probably going to speak directly to a lot of what you think and feel. So there you go. That is the last week in BookTube. A brief, abortive thing, 30 minutes long. That's what I'd like to keep them to. And mainly what I want to know from you is what you think. I have missed doing these things, but if you haven't missed seeing them, then I don't have to do them anymore. And also, if you would rather not hear about world news, I would totally understand that. Totally. It was the structure that I thought up to do this video, but if you would rather not hear about what's the horrible things going on in the outside world, I didn't even mention Harry and Meghan Markle's interview. I didn't even mention that. If you'd rather not hear about any of that, you just feel free to let me know. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.